Hey guys, today we're going to be discussing how shortage and price ceiling and surplus and price floor impact the supply and the demand curve. So we're taking our old graph, the price and quantity equilibrium, supply and demand equilibrium graph, and we're adding a new element to it. But don't worry, I'm going to explain it really thoroughly. So our I can statement is I can analyze how price changes and government intervention cause surpluses and cause shortages. So let's dive into what that means, okay? So a shortage is when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And that's this point right here. Basically, it means QD is greater than QS. We want more than they are providing, okay? There's a shortage. Sorry, there's the bell. Often, when prices goes down, people want it, right? Because we want to buy more and more and more if it's cheap. We want to get as much as possible for as little money as possible. So we want to buy more than producers can make. A shortage then pushes the price upward because consumers really want that cool, scarce good. And producers then can be like, oh, everyone wants it. I'm going to make it super expensive. So here's an example before I show you the graph. If I'm selling my house, I want to set the price lower because I want to attract buyers, right? So if my house is worth $150K, 150 grand, I maybe set it for 140 grand, lower than what it's actually worth. And if there's not a lot of houses for sale in Lawrenceburg, then a bunch of people will be like, oh, 140K, that house is worth more. I'm going to go put an offer in on it. And offers will drive the price up because this person will offer 145, this person will offer 147, and eventually it'll go up and up and up because there's a shortage of houses. There were not a lot of houses for sale in Lawrenceburg, okay? Let's see this on a graph. So here is a regular supply and demand graph, okay? We've got our supply and demand, our equilibrium point, and our equilibrium price and quantity, okay? So the graph starts right there. Then the price goes down without the supply and demand curve shifting. Don't be shifting curves anymore, okay? Not on these problems. Without supply and demand curve shifting, we move the price to a new level, move it down. So it started at equilibrium, we move it down to here, okay? And when we do that, what happens? We no longer, the price no longer hits right here and comes down. The price hits the supply curve and comes down, and the price hits the demand curve and comes down. And we have a QS that's very easy to see because the price came over and hit this supply curve, and a QD that's very easy to see because the price came over and hit this demand curve that are different than the equilibrium should be. Okay, and if you can see, quantity demanded is further right on the curve than quantity supplied. That means that quantity demanded, let's say that these were numbers, 3, 4, 5, 6. That means that quantity demanded is 5, and that is greater than 3. So quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. That means we want more than what the producers have to give us, and that's a shortage. Okay, so that's the graph, and it's kind of fun because you get to get out your colored pencils, and where price hits here, and then price hits here, we have this area that you shade in right there, okay? So price ceiling is very similar, but it's different because it's not just the price randomly going up or randomly going down. It is the government mandating a price. So this is a definition you need to know. Price ceiling. The government mandates the decrease of a price of a good permanently. So this is government interference in a way that changes our supply and demand graph, okay? So remember, the shortage should push the price up. The shortage of the good, everyone wants it, it's really popular. The producer should be able to be like, oh, if everyone wants it, I'm going to raise the price. Kind of like the house. Because I set the price low, everyone wanted it, it pushed the price up, 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 up. But the price ceiling is where the government mandates it. The government will not allow the price to be pushed up. They set a ceiling. Okay, here's the floor, here's the ceiling. The price cannot go above the ceiling. Okay? And this creates a permanent shortage. We have goods that we don't have enough goods because the government has set the price and said, sorry, can't go above this, and there's going to be a shortage, okay? So one good example is rent control in New York City. The government sets a rent price that landlords cannot go above. Then landlords just don't want to have apartments in that area. And the reason that they do this is apartments in New York City are getting very, very expensive. And lots of people can't afford them, and people are getting priced out of their neighborhoods. And that means that people that have lived there for years and years and years and years, rent is raising for them, but their incomes are not raising. And so they can't live in the neighborhood they've been living for years and years. So the government steps in and says, nope, sorry, landlords, you cannot raise the price above this level, above this ceiling. Here's the ceiling. You can't go above it, okay? Landlords don't want to supply apartments then because they're not going to make as much money. And lots of people are looking for these apartments that have the price ceiling that they can't go above, okay? Technically, this should drive prices up, right? The price, and people should be like, oh, I'll pay. Oh, I'll pay. And it's going up, 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 up. Oh, I'll pay because I want those nice apartments. But the government says, nope, here's the ceiling. Price cannot go above this ceiling, okay? And they're not allowed to raise rent. So that's the difference between a shortage and a price ceiling. A price ceiling is the government says this is the top, okay? And it creates a permanent shortage. An actual shortage is just naturally happens in supply and demand because there's not enough of a good, okay? So not every shortage is a price ceiling. Don't get them mixed up. Not every shortage is a price ceiling. Only when the price is mandated to be lower by the government is it a price ceiling. So if the question says government in it, it's probably going to be a price ceiling or price floor. If it doesn't say government, it's probably just a regular natural shortage, okay? All right, so here's what a price ceiling graph would look like. Again, we start with our regular supply and demand, our price equilibrium and quantity equilibrium. The price goes down. Here's the ceiling. Okay, and I know you're like, that looks like a floor because there's stuff above it, right? It's a ceiling because remember my drawing on the last page? The price cannot go above this number. The price cannot go above this number. So think of this as the ceiling, okay? So the price goes down because the government sets a low price. The government says, this is the price, this was the price, but it's too expensive. We're going to set the price down here. And here's what happens. We set this new price, we draw a point. We draw our dotted line over. We hit the supply curve. There's the supply curve, and we have to go down, okay? Then there's the price, and we draw our dotted line over. We hit the demand curve. There's the demand curve, and we have to go down, and that's our new QD. This is our new QS, okay? All of a sudden, we see that quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. That's a shortage, okay? And when we see that, we can color this in right here. And a good way to think about this, guys, whether it's a price ceiling or a price floor, which is kind of hard to think, doesn't this kind of look like a house right here? And we color in this part. Wouldn't this be the ceiling of the house? Yeah, okay. So technically prices should be forced back up because everyone wants this good and companies should be able to say, oh yeah, if everyone wants it, we're going to raise our prices. But they can't because the government says, nope. This is the price, and you can't go above this line, okay? So this shortage is there forever. It's permanent. All right, moving on. Let's talk about surplus and price floors. It's the exact opposite. So everything we just learned about shortage and price ceiling, we're going to flip-flop around for surplus and price floors. So surplus. Surplus is another word we need to know for sure. When quantity supplied, QS, is greater than quantity demanded, QD, the amount that they are supplying is more than the amount that we wanted. There's going to be a bunch of stuff on the shelves that people just don't want. And this is created when prices go up. There are more goods than people want. There's stuff on the shelves that's been sitting there forever. Okay, so a surplus is different. Remember, a shortage would push the price up because they'd be like, oh, a cool, scarce good. Well, if I'm making that cool, scarce good, I'm going to raise the price. A surplus is different. If it's not selling, they're going to lower the price because they want it to sell. So a surplus would push the price downward because companies want to sell those goods and there's a large supply. And consumers are like, oh, there's tons of that good on the shelf. I don't need to pay a lot of money for that. I'll wait till it goes on sale, like that sort of thing, okay? So firms, which is another word for businesses, will eventually lower the price. Oh, it's not selling at this price? Oh, I'll lower it. Okay, I'll lower it to this price. Okay, I'll lower it to this price. So a surplus will make the company want to, or the store want to put their goods on sale and lower the price. Let me give you another example. Let's use the housing market again. Let's say that I set my house for a high price, okay? I set my house for 160 when it's really worth 150K. So I set it for 160,000, okay? But there are lots of other houses available in Lawrenceburg. People aren't going to pay 160,000 if there's a bunch of other similar houses that are going for 140 and 135 and 150. Instead, they'll buy one of those cheaper ones. So to sell my house, it's sitting on the market. It is a surplus house. It is not selling. Eventually, I'm going to have to be like, okay, 160 was too much. I'm going to have to lower it to 150. I lower my price and someone comes and puts an offer in. That's an example of how my house was a surplus and it drove the price down because I couldn't sell it. I had to put it on sale. I had to lower the price, okay? So here is surplus graph. Again, we're starting with our supply and demand cross here. Here's equilibrium, go down to quantity, go over to price. But then the price goes up on something, and that causes our surplus because people don't want to pay more. So set a new price, okay? And then what happens? Dotted line, oh, we hit the demand curve first on this one, and go down, 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 down. And here's quantity demanded. Then from that new price, go over, 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 over. There's the supply curve. You hit it and you go down to quantity supplied. And all of a sudden, we've got these new lines, okay? QD, QS, all because we set a new price, price 1. And if you notice on this graph, let's say it had numbers 3, 4, 5, 6. Quantity supplied is 5. Quantity demanded is 3. So quantity supplied is further to the right. That means it is larger than quantity demanded. QS is greater than QD. Okay, so in that case, there is more than what people want. Quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. And eventually, those companies are going to realize it's not selling for this price. We got to go back down. And it's fun because you get to like color in this little thing. Okay. All right. So that's surplus. There's a type of government surplus called a price floor. Okay, so this is a price floor. Here's another definition we need to know. A price floor is when the government mandates the increase of a price of a good permanently. So now the government is saying, this is the floor, you can't go beneath it. Here's the price of the good, you cannot go beneath this, okay? A surplus, remember, should push the price down. My house wouldn't sell, so I pushed the price down. It was a surplus house, so I had to put it on sale so it would sell. But the government says, nope, sorry, here is the floor and you can't go beneath it, okay? So you cannot go below the floor. This creates a permanent surplus. Here's an example. Minimum wage. We all know about minimum wage. Y'all probably work minimum wage jobs. Unfortunately, they don't pay teenagers very well. At like McDonald's or Dairy Queen or something like that, you probably started out making $7.25 unless you work at Walmart. Lucky you. The government requires that wages be $7.25 federally. Now, different states have different things. So California has a higher minimum wage, but Kentucky keeps their minimum wage at $7.25, which is the federal minimum wage, okay? And the minimum wage became a thing around the New Deal. If you remember from your U.S. history class in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the federal government, Franklin D. Roosevelt, our president, passed forth legislation that said we need to pay people a minimum amount or they're not going to be able to live, okay? So here's the price of someone's labor, and it cannot go beneath that floor, okay? So everyone's labor is worth at least $7.25, the government says, and you cannot pay them less than that unless they're a waitress, but we'll get to that, okay? This is a price that employers cannot go below. So I know it's hard to think of your wages as a price, but technically your employer is buying your wages, is buying your labor. So they set the price, and the price is your wages. And the government says you cannot go below $7.25. The price of your labor is worth $7.25 an hour. However, this creates a surplus of workers whose skills are not worth $7.25 an hour. Some jobs just aren't worth paying people $7.25 an hour. Some people don't have enough skills. They aren't educated or trained enough to be worth $7.25 an hour. And I know that sounds really harsh, but economics is harsh. It's the truth, okay? So the government says you can't pay these people below $7.25 an hour, but companies are over here saying they're not worth $7.25 an hour. They don't have the skills for my company that's worth $7.25 an hour. So I'm just not going to hire that many people. That creates a surplus of workers. Sorry, there's an
Anyone
announcement.
interested in meeting with FCA this morning, please go to Gym B. They're ready. Again, FCA would like to invite you to come to Gym B to meet this morning. Thank you.
So there's going to be a surplus of workers because companies are just going to be like, $7.25? I can't afford that. And lots of people won't have jobs.
Don't like to make announcements?
Good Lord.
It's Gym C instead of Gym B. Thank you. Again, it's in Gym C.
Okay, so not every surplus is a price floor here because a price floor is when the government mandates it. Some surpluses are just natural. So if you're coloring in that little surplus triangle right here and the question says government, it's probably going to be a price floor. If it has nothing to do about government, it's just a natural shortage, it's going to be a price. It's going to be just a surplus, okay? So let's take a look at the graph, then we'll be done. So we have a regular supply-demand graph here, okay? We've got price equilibrium, quantity equilibrium, and we've got this point right here that is the equilibrium where everything meets, okay? But then the price is set by the government, and the price is almost always set higher, okay? And I know it looks like a price ceiling, right, because it's above. It's a price floor. We cannot go below this floor, okay? So they set this high price. What happens? We go at this new high price, go and hit the demand curve. There's the demand curve. Go down, label it QD. We go over and hit the supply curve. There's the supply curve. We go down and label it QS. And what happens? QS is greater than QD. And all these workers, if we're talking about minimum wage, right here, can't find jobs because their skills and labor aren't worth $7.25 an hour. Okay, QS is further right, which means it's greater than QD. Okay, so quantity demand decreases, quantity supplied increases. All of a sudden, QS is greater than QD, and we have a surplus. The surplus should go away, right? We should have all these extra workers or all these extra goods, and the company should be like, oh, crap, these aren't selling. Let's lower our price. But the government says, nuh-uh, this is the floor, and we cannot go below this floor. So this is here forever. It is a permanent surplus, okay? And that is price ceiling, shortage, price floor, and surplus, okay? If you have any questions, please email me and let me know. Again, I'm very sorry for all the annoying announcements that came on during this video.